Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. So in the last episode I talked about moral development and emotional maturity and how they go hand in hand. I didn't really go into a great deal of depth. So what I want to do is I want to actually pick up in today's episode with the idea of exploring what emotional maturity is really about. And essentially, a good way of checking in with that is to go, okay, who's the adult in the room? Now, I know that might sound like a strange question, and I'm not talking about chronologically being an adult. I'm talking about being an emotional, a psychological adult. I work with a huge number of men who are fundamentally chronologically an adult, but emotionally they often have locked themselves into being a teenager, usually around the ages of 15 and 16. I'm not being derogatory, okay? So all of those guys out there who are suddenly getting themselves a little bit upset, bear with me, okay? Because the beauty of this is we can do something about it. Okay, so as I pointed out in a previous episode, therapy is a venue, it's a vehicle to personal growth. So let's continue with the idea of exploring emotional maturity. What is it? Okay, now in psychology we can actually define this fairly clearly on a number of different variables. Okay. So, but before we go on with this, let me ask you to sit down and do a little bit of an audit. Okay, so would you describe yourself as a person who's very clearly aware of their thoughts, feelings, and why you might make decisions? Do you have the ability to be very, very patient in different situations? Or on the flip side, do you suffer a little bit of road rage? Do the kids piss you off at different times for apparently very little reason? Do you take criticism really badly? Okay, so again, just check in with yourself and always keep in mind that this is not judgmental. This is a stepping stone towards growth. All of us start off at the low end of the emotional maturity scale, right? Most of us travel along quite well, but a lot of us, under very difficult circumstances and situations, begin to get frayed around the edges. And one of the things I'll point out is we often regress in our emotional maturity under pressure. Okay, so the idea is when I'm under the pump, how well am I holding it together in my response? Am I heavily weighted on the reactive side, or do I respond more than I react? Okay, these are important aspects of this whole idea of emotional maturity. I work with a lot of guys who go through very, very, very difficult situations in their, relationships, in their partnerships, and often when confronted with the legal ramifications or the practical ramifications, often get to a certain point where they quite literally lose it. Now, in some instances, that's not a really good strategic thing to do. Because you're giving people ammunition, right? So let's begin to explore these variables, these elements, these factors where we can go, okay, this represents emotional maturity. So I'm going to quickly run through them, and then I'm going to start picking from top down to the last one and expand them a little bit more. And as I'm going along, one of the things I want you to do is just reflect in yourself about where you would put yourself. So you can use what we use in psychology, which is a SUD scale, subjective units of distress. In this case, select subjective units of emotional development. Okay. So, and that's 0 to 10, 0 being, yep, still in my nappies, and 10 being, like, I'm the wise one. Okay? Now, let's make it a little bit of fun, otherwise we can always get too stuck in being too serious. Okay, so the first one, and this is the one that I always talk about as being fundamental, it's foundational, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is something that's fundamentally central to who you are, all right? But it's not something that you're constantly aware of and focused on every minute of the moment. Instead, it becomes sort of part of your DNA of who you are, and it emerges at different points and in different situations and to a different degree. Okay. The next one's flexibility. Okay, so I often talk about, what's going to give you resilience? Self-awareness, flexibility, and the next one is adaptability. Number 4, I probably put this one quite smack central to the argument, is that in order to be responsive, we need to develop a high level of frustration tolerance. I need to be able to really tolerate things when the situation gets tough, right? And so part of that is also the capacity to delay gratification. And I've spoken about these things before, but I really want to sort of make a point to it, and we're going to dig into these over the next couple podcasts in a much more precise way to really be able to help people sort of start to go, okay, what can I do to change this? Now, for those of you who perpetually and perennially have made New Year's resolutions, I want you to be honest and put your hand on your heart and go, yes, each time I've done that, I have completely succeeded in doing so. Now, don't lie, right? Now, the reason why I'm asking that question, because it comes to a point of what we call long-term hedonism. That is my capacity to commit to something further down the track, and no matter what the challenges are, stick to it. Now, obviously, there will be at times things that are outside of your control. It's just the nature of the beast. And sometimes we might have made that commitment and we have been prepared to follow through and to get onto it and stick to it like glue. But unfortunately, for that reason of the inevitable, may have had to abandon it. All right? So there are elements where we've got to be flexible enough to go, yep, not going to make that one. But in general, the idea of hedonism is that we get satisfaction from the accomplishment of goals further down the track. Okay, and that means being able to delay gratification. The next one is to really focus on developing what's called an internal locus of control, i.e., I'm not a passenger in the universe, I'm not a victim of the universe, but I'm an active partner in my circumstances. And sometimes I really need to take a lot of ownership. Okay. Another aspect that's not necessarily often talked about in terms of emotional maturity is the idea of humility. right? So what's the opposite of humility? And that's hubris, right? The position of arrogance. I can do whatever it is that I want, whenever it is that I want to do it, and there are no repercussions. But the person who's emotionally mature exercises humility. All right, and we'll get into that a little bit more because a lot of people sort of get a bit antsy when I talk about humility, especially currently where we're all supposed to pat ourselves on the back continuously and tell ourselves how good we are. All right? There's a risk in that. The other aspect that is important, and you've heard me reinforce this again and again and again, is that I need to live by my values, not by what I'm feeling. Feelings are temporary. If you're going to give me the spiel, if I always go, with what I feel, then you've either ignored some of the consequences or you're about to have one giant reality check at some point in your life. And so that's a very important aspect of it. Now, the other one that I found that I want to throw in here, which is, I think, fundamentally important as well, is as I've gotten older and therefore hopefully more mature, the more grateful I've become for both big and little things. The practice of gratitude often gives me the opportunity to appreciate those things which otherwise I might gloss over. And I do that very consciously. And when I work with people, I encourage them to do that very consciously. Sometimes in writing a journal, sometimes it's just like, in order to get out of the bed, you might have to lie back and go, okay, before I do anything, what am I grateful for? Now, I may sound like I'm kidding, but sometimes, for some people, it's the joy of simply waking up and being able to breathe. And as we get older, be able to get out of bed without pain because our joints are seizing up and the muscles are tight. So this is what I mean by appreciating and having gratitude for the big and little things. Things that as a young person I might have taken for granted. Okay. So at this point, let me sort of go back, and I won't spend too much time on the whole self-awareness thing at the moment, but I want to talk a little bit more about flexibility and adaptability, because one of the examples of emotional immaturity is about being inflexible. And when I'm inflexible, I undermine my capacity to adapt to the changes around me. Right? And I need to have that because not only is it an emotional adaptation, but I also need to adapt cognitively, in other words, what I think, so beliefs, attitudes. If my values are good, I don't need to check those. But a lot of times I need to check my beliefs. Are they based on fact? Are they rational? Are they logical? And, as we're seeing in the world currently, a lot of people are absolutely and totally committed to being inflexible around their beliefs and their opinions. And no matter how much evidence we provide them with, they're not going to change their mind. And as we're seeing more and more and more, this is creating not only distress for themselves, a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, but it's also affecting the people around them and even people whom they love. So flexibility, again, is your ability to cope with, accept, and adjust to difficult situations. So what are those difficult situations in your life and how are you dealing with them? So remember the SUD scale, subjective units of distress, okay? Subjective units of emotional development, right? Naught being I'm still in nappies. 10 being I'm the wise one. Think about that. Try to get a feel for where you would put yourself on that scale. So firstly, self-awareness. Secondly, flexibility. Thirdly, adaptability. Right? Do you allow yourself to roll with things that you can't control, that you can't influence, that you can't dominate? And that's a really important aspect. Sometimes we just got to accept that, we're playing the long game, right? And in this long game, there are some battles that I'm going to lose and some that I'm going to win. Does that mean I'm going to give up? No. One of the deals that I made with myself a long time ago was that as far as it's in my power, I'm not going to give up on something that is important to me. Having said that, though, there have been times when I've had to let go of relationships. I've had to let go of certain projects that I was absolutely passionately committed to. And as I've gotten older, I've had to let go of certain things that were important to me on a physical level. Although since I had my shoulder replaced, we're getting back to some of that stuff. But that's for another time. So it is really, really, really important that we've got what I call stickability. Right? Now watch this with kids. No, I can't do it. Well, just hang in there, a little bit of practice, and you'll get there most of the time. And if you don't have the good grace to accept that, to really take that on board. Okay, I hope that's been useful to introduce the sort of, vectors in emotional maturity. We've spoken about self-awareness. We've talked about flexibility, adaptability. In the next podcast, I want to dive deep in this notion of frustration, tolerance, hedonism, gratification. The idea that I'm an active driver in my life. The idea of humility. Now, we might have to do another one after that for those last couple ones. But in the meantime, I want you to think about it, reflect on it, journal it. Begin to practice some of it. It's not impossible. It's not hard. Maybe you want to get to next January and make a New Year's resolution and stick to it. Might be a good test. Now, personally, I tend to avoid them for no other reason than, it's a bit like certain holidays where we, practice them, but we're really not into them. And, I've got my energies devoted to a lot of other things than simply, something that might be a bit, in my view, shallow. I know that bit sounds a bit judgy, but there are some things where I go, yeah, just don't worry about it. What used to be important to me when I was 25 is probably not so important now that I'm, where I am in my life, which is a lot older and hopefully a lot wiser. So until next time, remember, it's a journey and we're all on it, and let's make sure that we have a good one. It's ultimately the only one we've got. Please remember also my 2 books, Mountains of the Sea, which is a great story about how someone overcomes some of these issues and actually learns their own version of emotional maturity, and the other book that I've written, which is Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity, which is worthwhile for all of us as men to contemplate and engage in. Because the traditional stuff that we were taught don't work. It just sets us up to feel miserable and ultimately be lonely old men. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at noirtainment, noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.